The Highest Dividend: Why the EU's Peace is a Better Investment Than Guns Alone. Essay, written by DeepSeek AI. In an era of resurgent geopolitics and open conflict on European soil, the fundamental calculus of security is being urgently reevaluated. The traditional, tangible metric of defense spending, tanks, troops, and missiles, dominates the discourse, presenting a clear, if grim, return on investment, ROI, measured in military capability. Against this backdrop, the multilateral architecture of the European Union, built not on force but on shared rules and intertwined prosperity, can seem like an abstract or even feeble project. However, this is a profound misjudgment. A clear-eyed analysis reveals that the ROI of a multilateral organization like the EU in delivering peace and security is not only immense but fundamentally irreplaceable, representing a foundational investment upon which any meaningful defense spending ultimately depends. The EU's primary ROI in peace is the eradication of the very possibility of war among its members. For centuries, the European continent was a blood-soaked battlefield, with Franco-German hostility at its core, sparking 3 catastrophic wars in 70 years. The EU's precursor, the European Coal and Steel Community, was a masterstroke of strategic investment. By placing the war-making industries of France and Germany under a common authority, it transformed a zero-sum security dilemma into a positive-sum economic partnership. The result has been over 70 years of uninterrupted peace between its member states. The ROI here is incalculable. It is the millions of lives not lost, the cities not bombed, and the generations not sacrificed to war. It is the trillions of euros not spent on recovering from continental-wide destruction, funds that have instead fueled decades of prosperity, innovation, and social development. This peace dividend is the silent, often forgotten engine of Europe's modern wealth, a dividend so vast that it dwarfs any single defense budget. Furthermore, the EU's model extends this stability through powerful non-military tools, offering a superior and more versatile ROI in many security domains. While a tank can only deter an army, the EU's single market and customs union wield immense economic power, binding nations together so tightly that conflict becomes economically suicidal. The allure of access to this vast market is a powerful tool for enforcing norms and promoting stability in its neighborhood. Moreover, the EU is a leader in deploying sanctions, development aid, and diplomatic missions, tools that address the root causes of instability, such as poverty, corruption, and weak governance. This structural resilience is a form of preventative security. Investing in robust democracies and prosperous neighbors to the east and south prevents the emergence of crises that would eventually require a far more costly military response. In contrast, defense spending is inherently reactive. It prepares for a conflict that has already become inevitable. This is not to argue that defense investment is obsolete. The war in Ukraine has painfully illustrated that hard power remains a necessary instrument in a dangerous world. A credible deterrent is essential to defend the very peace that the EU has built. However, to view defense spending as an asterisk alternative to multilateralism is a critical error. Instead, they are complementary, operating at different levels of the security spectrum. Defense spending protects the garden from being overrun. The EU's multilateral framework is what tills the soil, pulls the weeds, and ensures the garden is so fertile and interconnected that the seeds of war cannot take root. A Europe of 27 nations reverting to purely national, uncoordinated defense postures would be weaker, more expensive, and more prone to the very internal divisions that its adversaries would exploit. The EU provides the political and strategic framework, from PESCO, Permanent Structured Cooperation, to the European Defense Fund, that makes increased national defense spending more coherent and effective. In conclusion, the choice between investing in multilateralism like the EU and spending on defense is a false dichotomy. The ROI of the EU in securing peace is the foundational investment. It is the cost of building and maintaining the very civilization that is worth defending. Defense spending is the indispensable insurance premium on that asset. To defund the multilateral project in favor of solely military investment is to mortgage the house to pay for the alarm system. The unparalleled 7-decade peace, the deep economic integration, and the tools of structural resilience provided by the EU offer a return that no amount of standalone artillery can match. The assurance that war among its members is not just unthinkable, but impossible. In the ledger of human progress, that is the highest dividend of all. Of course, here are several new chapters that expand on the future outlook of EU expansion and bilateral cooperation as a long-term strategy for reducing military threats and, ultimately, defense spending. Essay Addendum: The Future Outlook. Expansion and Cooperation as a Security Strategy. Chapter: The Stabilizing Power of the EU Accession Process. The European Union's most powerful foreign policy tool is not a sanction or a trade deal, but the promise of membership. The accession process itself is a monumental, multi-year investment in peace that systematically dismantles the foundations of conflict and external threats. For countries in the Western Balkans and Eastern Europe, the path to EU membership is a rigorous curriculum in democratic consolidation, rule of law, and good neighborly relations. The ROI here is a profound reduction in military threat at the source. The EU requires candidate countries to resolve border disputes and regional tensions as a precondition for progress. This process actively transforms potential flashpoints into managed dialogues. For instance, the EU-facilitated Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, despite its challenges, is a continuous mechanism preventing a relapse into open conflict. By compelling institutional reform, the EU helps build resilient states less susceptible to internal collapse or authoritarian capture, the very conditions that often invite external intervention and become security problems for the entire continent. Each successful accession doesn't just add a new member, it permanently erases a potential zone of conflict on the map, converting a security consumer into a security provider. The initial cost of integration funds is dwarfed by the avoided future cost of military containment, peacekeeping missions, and dealing with the fallout of failed states. Chapter: Strategic Bilateralism. Building a Lattice of Resilience. Beyond full membership, the EU is increasingly leveraging a network of bilateral and multilateral partnerships to create a lattice of resilience that extends its zone of stability. Frameworks like the Eastern Partnership with Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and others, and the Strategic Partnership with the Western Balkans are not mere talking shops. They are targeted investments in specific security threats. By deepening trade, integrating energy and transport networks, and facilitating people-to-people contacts, the EU makes these partners more prosperous, stable, and sovereign. A country with a growing middle class, strong trade ties to the EU, and a populace that sees its future in Europe is inherently less vulnerable to economic coercion and political destabilization by adversarial powers. Furthermore, initiatives like the European Peace Facility allow the EU to directly fund military equipment and training for partners like Ukraine, but crucially, they do so within a framework of collective EU decision-making. This is far more cost-effective and strategically coherent than 27 member states acting unilaterally, creating client states, or engaging in a messy and expensive scramble for influence. This bilateral cooperation contains and reduces immediate military threats, making large-scale, permanent defense buildups on the EU's eastern flank less necessary over the long term. The long-term calculus, from deterrence to irrelevance. The ultimate goal of this dual strategy of expansion and deep cooperation is not to create a fortress Europe capable of winning a war, but to engineer a geopolitical reality where large-scale military aggression against its interests becomes an irrational and obsolete strategy. This is the highest form of ROI on peace and security. Consider a future where Ukraine, Moldova, and the Western Balkans are fully integrated EU members. The border of the zone of perpetual peace would have moved eastward by hundreds of kilometers. The potential for conflict in the Black Sea region would be radically diminished. The resources required to defend a border running through Poland and Romania would be far greater than those needed to secure a border on the Dniester River, backed by a larger, more cohesive union. Similarly, a strategically deepened partnership with a country like Georgia reduces Russia's ability to use it as a pawn, thereby enhancing the security of the entire Black Sea region for all NATO and EU members. As this lattice of stability expands, the nature of the threat changes. The need for massed armor and short-range tactical air defense is replaced by a need for lighter, more mobile forces for crisis response. The immense, continuous cost of deterring a peer adversary at the gate could gradually be scaled down to a more manageable cost of managing peripheral risks. The investment shifts from reactive military hardware to proactive political and economic integration. An investment in a different future. The future outlook for European security is not predetermined. It will be shaped by the strategic choices made today. Doubling down on EU expansion and strategic bilateralism is an investment in a specific future, one where security is derived from shared prosperity and enmeshed interests, not just from mutual assured destruction. It is a patient, strategic, and profoundly cost-effective vision. While defense spending is an unavoidable necessity in the present, it is ultimately a cost center, a response to a world where threats persist. The multilateral investment in the EU's transformative power, however, is an investment in permanently altering the strategic landscape to make those threats diminish. It is the long game of turning today's battle lines into tomorrow's bustling borderlands, where the most significant security presence is not a garrison, but a customs post and a university exchange program. The unthinkable horizon: Russia as a European project. To envision a future where Russia is not merely a partner, but an integrated member of the European Union, is to peer across a chasm of current geopolitical reality. It requires a radical reimagining of the continent's political, cultural, and security architecture over the course of generations, not years. This is not a prediction, but a thought experiment in the ultimate return on the investment in peace, a testament to the transformative power of the European idea when applied over a century-long scale. The pathway to such a future would not begin with membership talks, but with a profound internal transformation within Russia itself. A post-Putin, post-authoritarian Russia would need to embark on a journey akin to that of Spain after Franco or the Eastern Bloc after 1989, but on a vastly larger and more complex scale. This long thaw would involve a genuine reckoning with its imperial past, the establishment of resilient, decentralized democratic institutions, and a societal pivot away from an identity based on military might and confrontation towards one rooted in civic participation and cooperative prosperity. The EU's role in this initial phase would be one of conditional engagement, offering technical expertise, civil society support, and phased market access to reinforce reformist factions and tangibly demonstrate the benefits of European convergence. The first institutional step would be deep integration into the European political and economic ecosystem, without formal membership. This would mirror the model of the European Economic Area, but tailored to a giant. Russia would gradually adopt the EU's acquis communautaire, its vast body of law, aligning its regulations on everything from product standards and competition policy to environmental protection and digital governance. This painful but necessary harmonization would dismantle the non-tariff barriers that separate economies and begin the intricate process of weaving Russia's industrial and agricultural might into the single market. Key infrastructure projects, from integrating the Russian power grid with the European ENTSOE to linking transportation corridors, would create tangible, physical interdependencies, making economic separation increasingly unthinkable and unprofitable for all sides. The most formidable obstacles would be the geopolitical ones. For Russia to join the EU, it would first have to unequivocally accept the post-Cold War settlement in Europe. This would mean a final, legally binding recognition of the independence and sovereignty of Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova within their internationally recognized borders. The Crimean annexation and the conflicts in Donbass and Transnistria would need to be resolved not through force, but through a painstaking process of international law and compensation. This would be the ultimate test of a new Russian identity, one that defines its greatness not by the territory it controls, but by the justice and stability it upholds. Concurrently, the EU itself would have to undergo a fundamental evolution, developing a new governance model capable of absorbing a nation of Russia's size and diversity without paralyzing decision-making. A multi-speed Europe would transition from an option to a necessity. In this distant future, the security and economic dividends would be revolutionary. The continent's primary source of instability for centuries would be neutralized, not by a balance of power, but by integration. The vast resources currently dedicated to military deterrence, from NATO's eastern flank to Russia's own defense budget, could be progressively redirected. Imagine the collective brainpower and capital, once focused on developing more advanced tanks and missiles, being channeled instead into joint missions to Arctic research, sustainable energy, and deep space exploration. Russia's immense natural resources, combined with Western European technology and capital, could power a green transition for the entire continent. The peace dividend of the 1990s would pale in comparison to the integration dividend of the 22nd century. Ultimately, the integration of Russia would represent the final and most audacious chapter of the European project. It would mark the end of a cycle of conflict that began with Napoleon's march on Moscow and culminated in the Cold War. It would prove that the logic of peace, of pooled sovereignty and shared destiny is so powerful that it can eventually overcome even the deepest historical animosities and the most entrenched geopolitical divides. While this vision remains a distant star to navigate by, its mere contemplation reinforces a crucial truth. The ultimate purpose of the EU's security policy is not to eternally contain a threat, but to create conditions where the threat itself ceases to exist, transforming a historical adversary into a fellow architect of a common future. Of course, here is a speculative chapter on a more distant future, exploring the potential reintegration of the UK and the broader, more global evolution of the European project. The global archipelago, the EU as a civilizational anchor, the distant future, perhaps by the late 21st century, presents a world transformed not by the erasure of national identities, but by the deepening of planetary-scale challenges that render old sovereignties insufficient. In this context, the European Union's success as a machine for generating stability, prosperity, and resilience becomes its most powerful export, and the foundation for a new, more expansive phase of integration. This would see not just the return of prodigal members, but the beginning of the EU as a global archipelago of like-minded states. The returning prodigal, the UK's inevitable homecoming. The story of the United Kingdom's return to the EU is not one of a triumphant, "I told you so," but a slow, grinding, and pragmatic recognition of geopolitical and economic reality. By the 2050s, the Brexit generation has passed from leadership, and the nostalgic allure of a solitary global Britain has been replaced by the cold, hard data of relative decline. While the UK remained a significant power, it watched as mid-sized nations in the EU, leveraging the collective weight of the single market, shared data frameworks, and joint research initiatives, pulled ahead in the key industries of the future: AI, biotechnology, and green energy. The journey back begins not with a political push, but an economic crawl. A new generation of British businesses, tired of the quote, sclerotic and costly dual regulatory regimes, forces a political realignment. The youth, who always saw themselves as European, vote consistently for parties advocating closer ties. The first step is a UK-EU confederation, a bespoke relationship involving full single market access and a customs union, requiring adherence to EU rules without a formal seat at the table. It is a humbler homecoming, a recognition that the sovereignty of influence within a bloc outweighs the sovereignty of isolation outside it. After a decade of proving its commitment, the political will on both sides aligns. The UK rejoins the EU, not as a reluctant skeptic, but as a chastened believer, its experience serving as a permanent cautionary tale against the illusions of splendid isolation. Beyond the continent, the associated democracy model. As the EU integrates the UK and stabilizes a partnership with a transformed Russia, its model becomes the global gold standard for managing the hypercomplexity of the 21st century. Other advanced, liberal democracies facing the pressure of continental-sized giants, a consolidated North American Union, a still authoritarian China, a powerful Indian superstate, begin to seek deeper institutional ties. They don't necessarily seek full membership, with its commitment to ever closer union and the euro, but something more profound than a simple trade deal. The EU, in response, pioneers a new status, associated democracy. This is a multi-tiered framework offering graduated integration. Founding members remain at the core, but a new outer ring emerges for nations like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea. Integrated security, full participation in a European defense union, with mutual defense guarantees and integrated command structures. The super single market, beyond goods and services, this involves seamless integration of digital, energy, and capital markets, with these associated nations adopting the EU's regulatory acquis in key sectors. Freedom of movement and talent, A blue card system becomes universal, allowing for the frictionless movement of students, researchers, and highly skilled professionals across this vast network, creating a powerful brain circulation effect that starves rival blocks of talent. Resource and resilience pooling. Canada and Australia provide vast natural resources, food security, and space. Japan and South Korea offer unparalleled technological and manufacturing prowess. The EU provides the scale, the regulatory framework, and the deep capital markets. The new European identity, this transformation forces a redefine The new European identity. This transformation forces a redefinition of what it means to be European. It is no longer a purely geographical or even cultural concept, but a civilizational and political one. To be European is to subscribe to a set of values: democratic liberalism, the rule of law, human rights, and multilateral cooperation, encoded in the EU's institutional software. The global archipelago is not a single federal state, but a networked constellation of nations, both continental and extracontinental, that have chosen to pool their sovereignty to preserve their way of life and amplify their global influence. In this future, the EU's greatest achievement is not the peace it secured within its original borders, but the fact that its model of shared sovereignty became the most desirable and effective framework for navigating an uncertain world. It is no longer just a European Union, but the nucleus of a league of democracies that finally learned to act as one. Of course, this is a fascinating comparison that reveals a profound evolution from a mytho-geographical concept to a political and philosophical one. The journey of the name Europa and its evolving meaning. From its etymological origins to its modern political identity is a story of inversion, a shift from a passive, defined object to an active, self-defining subject. The two concepts, separated by millennia, stand in stark and symbolic contrast. The etymology, a tale of passive definition. The name Europa finds its roots in ancient Greek mythology. The most common version tells the story of Europa, a Phoenician princess of exceptional beauty. The god Zeus, captivated by her, transformed himself into a magnificent, gentle white bull. Lured by the creature's placid nature, Europa climbed onto its back. Seizing the moment, Zeus bolted across the sea, carrying her from the shores of modern-day Lebanon to the island of Crete. In this foundational myth, the identity of Europa is characterized by three key elements. 1. External imposition. Europa's identity is not self-determined. She is chosen, abducted, and defined by an external, more powerful force, Zeus. Her name itself, potentially derived from the Greek words charis and ris, meaning wide, and ops, charis or eye, suggests a wide-gazing or far-seeing land, but again, as an object to be observed and claimed. 2. Geographical ambiguity. The myth does not define a continent, but a direction. For the Greeks, Europa was initially the lands to their west, distinct from Asia to the east, and Libya to the south. It was a borderland, a periphery, whose primary identity was in its difference from the Greek center. 3. Geography through subjugation. The continent derives its name from a figure who was a victim of conquest and assimilation. The original Europa was stripped of her original home and integrated into a new divine order against her will. In essence, the etymological Europa is defined from the outside, by force and by another's desire. The modern identity, a tale of active self-creation. The modern European identity, as forged by the European Union, is the antithesis of its mythological predecessor. It is a conscious, deliberate, and ongoing project of self-creation. 1. Internal construction. Unlike the princess, the modern EU is not defined by an external force. It is a voluntary and painstakingly negotiated construct, born from the ashes of self-inflicted continental suicide in World War II. Its identity is built from the inside out, through treaties, shared laws, the acquis communautaire and common institutions like the European Parliament and Commission. Where the mythological Europa was passive, the political Europa is profoundly active. 2. Sturf rights, not purely geographical, space, While geography provides a canvas, the modern European identity is fundamentally based on a set of shared values. The Copenhagen criteria for membership, democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and protection of minorities, define what it means to be European more than any river or mountain range. This is why the global archipelago model is possible. It extends the political identity beyond the strict geographical confines of the myth. 3. Dinewity unity through sovereignty and integration. This is the most powerful inversion. The mythological Europa was unified by being subjugated. The modern EU seeks to create unity through the asterisk pooling of sovereignty. Nations voluntarily cede slivers of their national autonomy to a higher collective to gain greater strength, security, and prosperity for all. It is the rejection of the zero-sum conquest that the myth represents, replacing it with a positive-sum project of integration. The comparison reveals a dramatic arc. The asterisk etymological Europa is an object, a princess to be taken, a coastline to be named, a land to be conquered. Her identity is a consequence of someone else's action. The asterisk modern European identity asterisk is a subject, a legal entity that legislates, a political body that debates, a values-based community that defines its own borders and future. Its identity is a consequence of its own actions and treaties. The journey of Europa is thus a metaphor for the continent's own transformation. It is the story of moving from being a prize fought over by warring gods and empires to becoming a creator of its own destiny. The name remains, but its meaning has been fundamentally redeemed, from a symbol of external imposition to a beacon of voluntary, internal, and peaceful self-determination.